Black CEO mocked by billionaire white family minutes later. She axes their $500M Lifeline. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Hey, Blackie, go serve! The words sliced across the ballroom like a blade dragged over glass, sharp, bright, impossible to ignore. Every chandelier shimmered as if it had heard the insult itself. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Laughter choked. 100 shoulders stiffened beneath silk, satin, and tailored tuxedos. At the center of the room, under the wide halo of crystal light, she stood, a woman in a pale blush gown, simple yet exquisitely cut, the kind of elegance that didn't need to prove itself. She held a phone to her ear, posture composed, eyes fixed forward not on the ones who mocked her, but on the invisible line she refused to cross, the line of reacting. Across from her, a blonde woman, the matriarch of an old money dynasty, tilted her head back and released a booming laugh. It was theatrical, gleeful, vicious. Her diamond bracelet flashed under the chandelier like a signal flare as she pointed straight at the black woman, ensuring every guest saw exactly who she'd chosen to humiliate. Behind her, 2 men in tuxedos, her husband and son, if one judged by the matching arrogance, grinned like they were watching a stage play written solely for their entertainment. Their shoulders shook with laughter. Their eyes sparkled with the comfort of privilege, the kind that made cruelty feel like sport. The ballroom itself seemed to lean in. A forest of gowns and bow ties turned toward the scene, curiosity blooming like wildfire. Some guests smirked, others whispered behind manicured hands. A few lifted their phones halfway, ready to film if things became juicy enough. And somewhere in the back, someone stifled a chuckle, as though racism was merely another flavor of champagne being passed around. But the woman with the phone didn't flinch, not when the insult hit her, not when the room laughed, not even when the matriarch added loud enough for the band to hear, "Honestly, who let the help wander this far inside? Sweetheart, the service corridor is that way." More laughter, cruel, comfortable. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Not a tremble, just pressure, like she was remembering the exact temperature of dignity under fire. She inhaled once, slow, as if pulling air from a different world than the one surrounding her. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The crowd shifted, forming a loose circle around the humiliation, the way people naturally gather around a spectacle. In their eyes, she wasn't a guest. She wasn't an equal. She was an interruption in their carefully curated hierarchy. The matriarch stepped closer, still smirking, her voice now a syrupy blade. Is someone confused about their place tonight? No one intervened. No one said she didn't deserve to be here. No one questioned the cruelty. Instead, the ballroom bent itself around the insult. The pianist's hands faltered mid-phrase. 2 waiters froze, holding silver trays suspended between breaths. A couple near the champagne fountain exchanged a conspiratorial glance, enjoying the unfolding humiliation more than the vintage in their glasses. The black woman finally lowered the phone just enough that her face was fully visible. The chandelier light caught the smooth line of her jaw, the calm in her eyes, the focus that looked nothing like embarrassment. It looked like calculation. A quiet, measured calculation that didn't belong to someone out of place. It belonged to someone who understood the architecture of power so deeply she never needed to flaunt it. But the matriarch didn't see that. Privileged people rarely do. She pointed again closer this time, her laugh simmering down into a smirk sharpened by entitlement. Go on, dear. Take someone's drink order or something. At least be useful. A small gasp rippled through the crowd, not out of outrage but excitement. Drama had officially arrived. The black woman's gaze lifted, sweeping the ring of faces around her. Some mocking, some amused, a few pretending neutrality but hungry for the downfall they expected. She saw every smirk, every raised brow, every phone angled just slightly enough to capture her reaction. She saw them, and she saw through them. Then, slowly, she brought the phone back to her ear, not to seek comfort, not to plead, but to deliver a sentence. Her voice dropped soft, precise, deadly. "Stay on the line." Just 3 words. Yet the room felt colder, like the chandeliers themselves had dimmed out of respect or fear. A stillness followed, pulsing like the moment before a cracking storm. Guests exchanged glances, sensing without understanding that something irreversible had begun. The matriarch, oblivious, rolled her eyes and turned back to her entourage. "She's embarrassing herself. Let's move on." But the woman with the phone didn't move, didn't break, didn't shrink. Her silence was a blade, her posture a declaration, her breath a countdown. And in that polished white ballroom filled with brittle laughter and borrowed confidence, no one realized they had just mocked the one person whose decision could rewrite the fate of everyone in that room. No one realized the woman they insulted was about to make a call that would cost their family $500 million, and she would do it without raising her voice. Silence didn't just return to the ballroom, it settled. Heavy, slow, a velvet weight pressing down on every polished shoulder in the room. Even the chandelier light seemed to dim, as if the crystals themselves were embarrassed for what had just happened. She still stood there, phone to her ear, posture straight, expression carved from tempered quiet. No panic, no tremble, no cracking composure. Only the steady breathing of someone who had lived through far crueler storms than a room full of privileged laughter. The matriarch, noticing the silence hanging longer than she expected, turned back toward her with a smirk, trying too hard to stay confident. "Oh, don't glare at me, sweetheart," she said. "You know I'm right. This isn't your circle, and you should be grateful you were even allowed this close to it." A ripple of awkward chuckles passed through her entourage, but lighter this time, thin, hesitant, uncertain. Confidence was leaking from the room like heat escaping an open door. The black woman shifted her phone slightly, eyes lowering not in submission but in assessment, the kind of assessment predators mistake for timidity. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft enough the crowd had to lean in without meaning to. "I'm still on the line. Just that." A man in a tux just behind the matriarch frowned. "What does that even mean?" he muttered, though the question was more to himself than anyone else. Something about her tone pulled at the edge of his instinct, like a shape forming behind fog. The matriarch rolled her eyes, forcing a laugh that no longer found comfortable echoes in the crowd. "Ignore her," she said loudly. "Some people make everything dramatic, but she was the only dramatic one here." The black woman hadn't raised her voice once, hadn't reacted, hadn't defended herself. The quiet around her was not the quiet of someone defeated, it was the quiet of someone choosing her weapon. 2 guests near the bar exchanged glances. "Is she staff?" one whispered. "I don't think so," the other breathed back. "Look at her dress. That's designer." So, no one wearing that looks like they wandered in by mistake." The matriarch extended her hand toward the woman again, as if presenting an object unworthy of its place. "Someone get her a tray or something. If she's going to stand around doing nothing, at least let her be useful." But now the room wasn't laughing, not fully, not comfortably. The humiliation no longer felt safe to witness. You could feel it in the stiffening backs, the tightening jaws, the glances that darted too quickly away. The balance of the room was shifting, small and subtle, like the first tilt of a chandelier before it falls. The woman with the phone finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes moved slowly across the semicircle of faces watching her. Some held pity, some held cruelty, some held fear of being caught enjoying the spectacle. But she wasn't looking for any of that. She was studying them the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before the incision. Behind the matriarch, her son, the one who had laughed the loudest, tilted his head. His grin wavered, curiosity bleeding through arrogance. "Mom," he whispered, "maybe leave it?" "She's staring." She was. Not angrily, not pleadingly, just staring. A precise, unbroken line of focus. The matriarch drew in a sharp breath, annoyed by the sudden shift in energy she couldn't control. "Oh, please!" she snapped. She's harmless. But even she didn't believe that anymore, not with the way the woman's fingers rested on the phone, not with the way her eyes held the whole room in place. Not with the way silence was no longer her weakness, it was her territory. Then, without warning, the black woman spoke again. Calm. Cool. Absolute. I heard everything. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of record like the first line of a transcript filed before a verdict. The matriarch's lips parted. A flicker of uncertainty broke across her perfect composure. And somewhere deep inside that perfect, glittering ballroom, the ground beneath their laughter began to crack. The ballroom didn't know her name, but the world outside this chandeliered bubble already bowed to it. She stood perfectly still, phone still pressed to her ear, the soft hum of the call barely audible over the murmured tension rippling through the guests. Her silence was doing the impossible, forcing the wealthiest people in the room to question what, exactly, they had just provoked. She didn't look like a woman who needed permission to be here. She looked like a woman who gave it. But of course, these people never considered that possibility. They saw the surface, the melanin, the simplicity, the understated elegance. They saw a target, not a titan. What they didn't see was the decades beneath her calm, years of building, years of being underestimated, years of outthinking billionaires who never imagined someone like her could outrun them in their own game. Her journey didn't glitter like their inherited legacies. It had teeth. It had fire. It had the quiet violence of ambition sharpened by necessity. She had built her empire the way storms build oceans, pressure over time, unrelenting, unseen until the moment it swallows the shore. No one in this room knew that the voice on the other end of her call belonged to the managing director of a global investment consortium, or that she was the single largest stakeholder in that consortium, or that the line she told them to stay on wasn't a casual instruction, it was the prelude to an earthquake. The matriarch, still trying to regain footing, scoffed. "Who exactly are you talking to? Your supervisor?" A few people snickered, relieved. Someone was trying to reset the social order. But then the black woman lifted her chin, only slightly yet enough to send a chill through anyone perceptive enough to catch it. Supervisor. If only they knew. On the other end of the line, a voice spoke low, professional, waiting. "Mom, do you require escalation?" She didn't answer yet. She let the question hang. Let the words seep into the marble. Let the room absorb the fact that someone, somewhere, was prepared to move at her instruction alone. Her thoughts drifted for a heartbeat to the long staircase she had climbed to sit at the top of a machine powerful enough to tilt markets. To the countless boardrooms where her intelligence had been questioned until her results silenced every critic. To the nights she slept under her desk because rest was a luxury she couldn't afford, while the world treated her like a footnote. She had built a fortress out of discipline, an empire out of invisibility, a legacy out of silence. These people assumed silence was weakness. They had no idea it was her favorite armor. A man near the champagne fountain whispered, "She's too calm. Something's off." His wife elbowed him. "Don't start." But he kept staring at the woman with the phone, sensing instinctively the balance of the room tilting around her. At the far end of the hall, one of the event coordinators glanced at a tablet and frowned. A notification flashed across the screen, one shed never seen at a gala before. Investment review pending high-priority entity. She blinked, confused, checking the internal system again. The tag wasn't for a company. It was for a person. For a guest. For her. The coordinator looked up slowly, scanning the room until her eyes landed on the woman in the blush gown, the only person not drowning in embarrassment or arrogance. The only person who looked like she didn't need this place, or these people, or their borrowed power. The only person who looked like she could take everything away and never break a sweat. Still holding the phone, the black woman finally exhaled a deliberate, measured release of breath that sounded like acceptance. Not of insult, of decision. She was done being underestimated, done being polite, done pretending their arrogance was harmless. She raised her chin, eyes settling on the family who had mocked her, and with a voice calm enough to terrify gods, she said, "Keep the line open. I'm ready." At the opposite end of the ballroom, far from where she stood, calm and unshaken, stood the people who believed they owned the night, the Whitford family. Their name was stitched into charity banners, engraved on museum wings, whispered with reverence in country clubs that pretended old money equaled old virtue. To the untrained eye, they were the portrait of generational success. The gleaming smiles, the tailored tuxedos, the matching arrogance that lingered in every tilt of their chin. But portraits lie, and theirs was cracking long before the night began. The matriarch, Eleanor Whitford, had perfected the posture of superiority so completely that even the way she breathed felt like a lecture. She wore entitlement the way others wore, pearls effortlessly, proudly, aggressively. Her family was her empire, and arrogance was the currency she demanded they spend generously. Her husband, Charles, stood behind her, tall, handsome in a brittle sort of way, the kind of man who smiled too wide because everything underneath that smile was collapsing. The press called him a business visionary. What they didn't know was that the vision had been burning through cash faster than he could hide the smoke. Their son, Preston, was the one who had laughed the loudest, the one who pointed, the one whose amusement flickered just a little too brightly on his face. He was the embodiment of generational decay, a boy born into wealth but allergic to work, his ambitions as hollow as the champagne glass he refilled every 10 minutes. Every failed startup, every embarrassing scandal, every bad investment had been quietly buried by his family's checkbook. And then there was their daughter, Clarissa, beautiful, poised, ruthless. She had learned from her mother that cruelty was a social seasoning. Sprinkle it lightly, smile sweetly, and no one would call it what it was. She didn't laugh loudly like her brother. Her cruelty was quieter, more polished, more dangerous. Her eyes were blades wrapped in mascara. Together, they were the perfect facade. But facades don't save empires. For the last 18 months, Whitford Enterprises, once a titan of luxury real estate, had been drowning beneath waves of debt. Bad developments, failed acquisitions, disappearing partners. Banks had begun to whisper. Investors had started to pull away. The foundation beneath their polished image was crumbling inch by inch. Tonight's gala was not a celebration. It was camouflage. A desperate attempt to look powerful while begging for salvation behind the scenes. And that salvation had a number. $500 million. A lifeline. A final chance. A single injection of capital that would keep their empire from collapsing in on itself. The irony was almost poetic. The woman they mocked, the one they believed was beneath their notice, was the silent force behind that lifeline. Her approval alone would determine whether the Whitfords survived or became a cautionary tale whispered about at future galas. The family, oblivious, continued performing superiority for the watching crowd. Eleanor brushed imaginary dust from her gown and sighed dramatically, loud enough to reclaim attention. "I swear," she said, rolling her eyes toward her friends. "The quality of guests is declining by the year," Preston snorted. Clarissa smirked. Charles attempted another encouraging smile, though his eyes darted nervously toward the coordinator who had just left the room with a pale face. None of them noticed how the air near them tightened. They didn't recognize the shift. They didn't sense the danger. They didn't understand that arrogance becomes fatal when pointed at the wrong target, but someone else did. Near the side entrance, an investment officer from a partnering firm glanced at his buzzing phone. His expression changed instantly. His fingers hovered above the screen before freezing entirely. He reread the notification. Then he looked up straight at the Whitfords. His face drained of color. He knew, not everything, just enough. The black woman was not help. She was not lost. She was not lower. She was the storm. And in a few minutes, the Whitford family would learn that storms don't ask for permission before they erase what's built on sand. The ballroom, moments ago a stage for arrogance, now vibrated with an unease no one could name. Something had shifted, subtle, silent, seismic, and all of it centered around her. She stood exactly where she had been insulted, phone still pressed lightly to her ear, posture steady, gaze locked on the Whitfords like she was examining the architecture of a building she had already decided to demolish. On the other end of the call, the managing director spoke again, his tone lower, cautious, aware that timing mattered. "Mom, do you need authorization?" The room didn't hear the words, but they felt the tension coil around her like a drawn bow. Her eyes never left the family who mocked her. Eleanor Whitford, emboldened by the silence she mistook for surrender, lifted her chin with a sneer sharp enough to cut skin. "Look at her," she scoffed to her guests, "still pretending that phone call is important. Honestly, Delusion is exhausting. Her daughter giggled. Her son smirked. Her husband pretended not to panic. The woman with the phone didn't blink. Instead, she lowered her gaze to the marble floor, just long enough to register the faint stain of spilled champagne near her feet, a translucent echo of their humiliation. A reminder. Then she inhaled, slow, deep, controlled, a breath that felt like a countdown. And as she spoke, her voice was softer than the music, quieter than the clinking crystal, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking wood. Authorize escalation. 3 words, measured, precise. A trigger disguised as calm. On the other end of the line, the managing director's response was instantaneous. Yes, ma'am. Executing. A tiny chime sounded in her speaker, barely audible to the room, deafening to anyone who understood what that chime meant. Dominoes had just started to fall. She lifted her head again, eyes cutting through the crowd, landing back on the Whitfords with an intensity that could level mountains. For a fraction of a second, she saw something flicker in Eleanor's expression. Recognition, not of identity, but of danger, the first crack in the matriarch's armor, and then it happened. Phones began buzzing. Not one, not a handful, dozens, rippling across tuxedo pockets and sequined clutches like an incoming tide. Notifications lighting up the room in soft neon flashes, urgent, synchronized, escalating. An investor seated near the bar glanced at his screen and went rigid. Another stared at her phone, blinking in disbelief. A whisper spread, thin but growing. Is this real? Is the review live? No, no way. The Whitford son frowned at the sudden flurry of alerts. What's happening? He muttered. His father checked his own device and froze. The color drained from his face. His hand trembled. He showed the screen to his wife. Eleanor's eyes widened as she read the words, Whitford Enterprises Capital Review. Escalated. Status. Red level. Primary backer. Pending cancellation. She felt the floor tilt beneath her heels. No, she whispered, voice cracking. This must be a mistake. But the black woman wasn't done. She shifted the phone slightly and spoke again, her tone colder now, like steel dipped in ice. Proceed with full withdrawal. On the call, the managing director answered immediately. Understood. Pulling the $500 million line. Eleanor's breath punched out of her chest. Preston's smirk vanished. Clarissa's lips parted in stunned disbelief. Charles Whitford took a single step backward, as if the marble had suddenly turned to water beneath him. The woman finally lowered the phone from her ear. Not dramatically, not triumphantly. Simply, deliberately. She wasn't flaunting power. She was executing it. Her gaze swept across the family who had mocked her calm, unshaken, lethal in her silence. And then, softly, like the prelude to a storm, you should have stayed quiet. Her voice echoed in the marble hall, cutting deeper than any insult thrown at her minutes before. Because only now did the Whitfords understand. The woman they mocked was not a guest, not a mistake, not a prop for their amusement. She was the hand holding the lifeline they needed to survive, and she had just let it go. The collapse didn't start with screaming. It started with silence. A stunned, suffocating quiet as the Whitfords stared at their glowing screens, realization spreading across their faces like a slow, unstoppable poison. The ballroom, once a shrine to their influence, was now a battlefield, and every phone buzzing in that golden room was another bullet. Eleanor Whitford clutched her husband's arm. What does it mean? She demanded, voice trembling despite her effort to sound composed. Why is it red level? Why tonight? Charles didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the notification, reading it again and again as if repetition could change the truth. Across the room, the black woman slipped her phone into her clutch with a movement so controlled it felt ceremonial. She didn't announce anything. She didn't raise her voice. She simply existed, and her existence was enough to unravel everything they'd built. Phones chimed again. Alerts multiplied. A nearby investor gasped. They pulled the entire line? All 500? Another whispered. This can't be real. Without that money, he didn't finish the sentence. No one needed him to. Everyone knew what came next. At the Whitford Enterprises headquarters, miles away, servers blinked to life in emergency mode. Encrypted instructions flowed through terminals. A cascade of internal messages triggered, authorization revoked, transfer suspended merger files, locked accounts under review, a team of senior analysts, already on standby per the CEO's earlier hint, executed the protocol with clinical speed. Contracts awaiting signatures were pulled back into private vaults. Automatic transfer authorizations were frozen. The financial scaffolding holding the Whitford empire upright was quietly, methodically dismantled. Back in the ballroom, the consequences arrived in real time. One of the Whitford's board members practically stumbled into the room, breathless, face white as marble. "Eleanor," he gasped, "we have a problem." "We know," she snapped. "It's some kind of miscommunication. It isn't." His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "They're pulling the last of the liquidity support. Effective immediately." "Our lenders," he hesitated, terrified they just started matching the withdrawal. A murmur cut through the guests like a sudden drop in temperature. Lenders never move first, but they always move fastest once they sense blood. Charles steadied himself on the back of a chair. How could this happen in minutes? The answer was standing 20 feet away in a blush gown. A woman who didn't look at them now, not out of mercy, but because they no longer mattered. More phones buzzed. A man from Merrill, 2 women from Rothman Capital, a major donor from Harlington Private Bank. They all stepped aside to check alerts. Their faces twisted into the same horrified pale. It's chain reacting. They've lost collateral. Their credit lines frozen. The market will smell this in seconds. Clarissa Whitford exhaled sharply, panic rising behind her eyes. "This isn't legal," she hissed. "It's completely legal," a banker whispered back. She triggered a review. The numbers collapsed. "The system is doing the rest." Eleanor spun toward her, voice sharp as shattered crystal. "What system?" The woman answered without looking up from her phone. "The one you mocked." The words weren't meant to be loud. They weren't dramatic. But they sliced through the ballroom with the precision of a scalpel. For the first time, the Whitfords collectively understood. This wasn't backlash. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't chaos. This was procedure. A pre-designed, fully legal chain of events activated by a single command. A command given by the woman they had tried to humiliate. Preston finally broke, stepping forward, voice cracking. "Please," he choked out. "We didn't know who you were." She finally looked at him. Not with anger, not with pity, but with truth. "You should have known who you were." His mouth snapped shut. Eleanor's knees weakened. Charles whispered something that sounded like a prayer. But prayers don't stop avalanches. And what was happening to their empire wasn't punishment. It was gravity. The first scream didn't come from a person. It came from a phone. A sharp notification tone cut through the ballroom like a crack in glass. Then another, and another, until the entire room flickered with vibrating devices, glowing screens, and hushed panic. News spreads fast in wealthy circles. Disaster spreads faster. Within seconds, financial networks pushed alerts. Whitford Enterprises faces immediate funding withdrawal. $500M Lifeline terminated. Emergency board meeting expected tonight. Guests who had once gathered close to the Whitfords now took a single, unified step back, as if the family carried a contagion. Conversations disintegrated into frantic whispers. Investors turned pale. Socialites pretended to check their lipstick while secretly refreshing market apps. A man in a midnight tux muttered, "They're finished." A woman beside him whispered, "This will tank by morning." Another added, "Who pulled the plug?" Eyes began moving slowly, reluctantly toward the woman in the blush gown. She didn't bask in it. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Her stillness was enough for the room to understand. The Whitfords were no longer the apex of this ecosystem. She was. Near the stage, the event host received an urgent message and froze mid-step. His microphone slipped from his hand, echoing a hollow thud that rolled across the marble floor. Guests turned, expecting an announcement. None came. He simply stood there, staring at the screen as if witnessing a ghost. Behind him, the large LED display, once filled with charity slogans, flashed as backstage technicians pushed through new updates. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom fell into anticipatory silence. Then the screen shifted. Whitford Enterprises. Market confidence. Declining 27%. Drop expected. Primary backer identified. Cole Consortium. Withdrawal confirmed. A collective inhale swept through the hall. They finally understood whose voice had been on the line. Eleanor Whitford swayed, gripping the edge of a nearby table. Preston looked like he might be sick. Clarissa covered her mouth, mascara smudging as tears formed not from shame, but from fear. Fear of watching their legacy crumble in front of everyone. And the worst part? No one rushed to comfort them. Not the donors, not the investors, not the friends who once worshipped their name. The room moved like a tide pulling away, distancing itself, abandoning the sinking ship before it dragged them under. The shift was so swift, so merciless, it stunned even the onlookers. The moment power evaporates, loyalty dissolves with it. In the center of the storm, the woman who started it all didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't savor their downfall. She watched with a calm so steady it unsettled even those untouched by the chaos. It wasn't triumph, it was clarity. The Whitfords weren't victims, they were architects of their own ruin, and the world was finally publicly seeing the cracks shed recognized from the moment they opened their mouths. The ballroom trembled with whispers, screens glowed, reputations cracked, and in the center of it all, she finally moved. One step, soft, measured, deadly. The crowd parted without being asked instinctively, fearfully as if some quiet authority inside her pushed them aside. Even the chandeliers seemed to pull their light toward her, leaving the Whitfords stranded in the dim. Eleanor Whitford tried to regain her composure, her voice brittle as thin ice. This is outrageous. You can't just walk in here and destroy a family's legacy." The woman paused, turning her head slightly, the way a judge might acknowledge a plea before delivering a sentence. "I didn't destroy it," she said softly. "You handed me the match." A stunned hush fell over the room. Preston stumbled forward. "Look, please. If we offended you, we're sorry. We didn't know who you were." She met his eyes, calm, a calm that felt like a verdict. "That," she replied, "was the problem." Then she walked past him, past all of them toward the center of the ballroom as the LED screen flickered again. Backstage technicians scrambled, unsure whether to stop the feed, but the system had already been overridden by her team. A new slide appeared. Cole Global Consortium primary shareholder. Aria Cole gasps erupted, a name the financial world feared, a strategist known for silent, surgical moves. A ghost in the upper markets suddenly made flesh in a blush gown. Eleanor's lips trembled. "Cole, as in Cole Capital. Cole Holdings. Cole Futures?" Aria turned fully to face her for the first time since the insult. "All of them," she answered. Another gasp cut through the crowd, sharper this time. A few people actually stepped away from the Whitfords, as if proximity alone could sink them further. The matriarch's knees weakened. Her hand flew to her chest. You're the one backing us. The one whose call Aria finished for her, kept your empire breathing." Her voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to." Clarissa shook her head in disbelief. No, you can't just take it away. We need that capital. You can't do this." Aria's gaze flicked toward her soft but merciless. "I didn't take anything," she said. "I withdrew what was mine." The words hit harder than any shout could. The ballroom felt smaller now, like the walls themselves leaned closer to hear the end of the story. Aria looked at all of them, the family, the guests, the world behind their phones, and delivered the truth they had refused to see. "I was here tonight to sign the agreement. $500 million. A lifeline your family desperately needed." She paused. "And before I could even take my seat, you told me to serve." A sound escaped Eleanor, a choked, broken thing. Not sorrow, not apology. Realization. Aria took one final step toward them, her voice quiet enough that the entire room leaned in. "You don't get to decide who belongs here," she said. "You only revealed who doesn't." Her words hung in the air, shimmering like heat over scorched earth. And the Whitfords, once the rulers of the room, stood trapped in the wreckage of their own arrogance as the truth settled in. They hadn't just insulted a guest. They'd spit on the hand, keeping them alive. And she had just closed it. By morning, the headlines told the story for them. Whitford Empire collapses overnight. $500M withdrawal, triggers market spiral. Cole Consortium redirects funds to Minority Innovation Fund. Reporters crowded outside the Whitford residence. Board members resigned in waves. Partners fled, lenders cut every line. But Aria Cole didn't watch the fall. She didn't need to. She spent the next day in a quiet conference room, signing documents that redirected the $500M Lifeline. The Whitfords squandered, turning it into seed capital for young, underestimated founders who reminded her of herself. No cameras, no speeches, no victory parade. Power didn't require applause. That evening, as she stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights reflected in her eyes, steady, sharp, unbreakable. A driver opened the door for her, but before entering, she looked back once toward the skyline. "Arrogance builds empires," she murmured, "but character decides who keeps them." Then she entered the car, leaving behind a world that had finally learned her name and learned it the hard way.